Hey guys, today we are in the Gilded Age and we're talking about some of the important people, some of the important entrepreneurs, people that started their own business and really pushed the American economy into the modern age, and then also their philanthropy as well. And so we'll get into a little bit of, were they captains of industry or were they robber barons? Let's start off by discussing what an entrepreneur is. The definition is it's a person or a group that starts their own business. So they start their own business, they're working for themselves, they're trying to build it up and make a lot of money. During the late 1800s, which is what we're calling the Gilded Age, there was a lot of entrepreneurs that started to spring up in American life. And basically they found ways to make products cheaper and found ways to put more money in their pocket. So this period that we're talking about, 1865 to 1900, it's called the Gilded Age because it looks like America is booming. On the outside, everything looks great. So gilded means covered with gold. So on the outside, it looks like everything is great, covered with gold. But underneath, there's problems. There's problems bubbling under the surface. There are workers that aren't getting paid very well, that can't feed their family, and there's entrepreneurs and big business monopolists who are taking advantage of workers, and all kinds of other problems that we're going to get into as well. Here I've got some pictures of two of the most famous robber barons. So we've got John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie, and both of these guys had the name captain of industry, and sometimes they had the name robber baron. And a lot of people view them as captains of industry because they basically started the American economy that we see today, this modern economy that's really booming and is number one in the world. And they were a big part of that. The other side, the flip side of this, is they were called robber barons by many people because they ruthlessly destroyed their competition, those that were trying to compete against them in the marketplace, and they did not pay their workers very well, and they did not allow them much time off, etc. And so they had this kind of double persona. There are some really good things that they did, and then there's some really not so great things that they did. And these two guys are the most successful that we're going to really dig into. So you got John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie. Let's start with Carnegie first. So he was not born in the United States. He was actually born in Scotland to a very poor family. And so he's one of these rags to riches stories that we hear about during this time period because he was an immigrant. His family was poor. He moved to the United States and he worked his way up to be a very rich person, a very powerful person in American society. It all started after the Civil War. So Civil War ends 1865. Carnegie goes out and he builds a steel mill. Okay, and he begins to sell steel to railroad companies so that they can build their tracks, makes money in that. As he gets more money, he decides that he's going to buy iron ore fields, he's going to buy coal mines, he's going to buy ships, so that he can control everything that he needs to make steel. And that's called vertical integration. He's going to own everything that he needs from the first step to the last step of making steel so that he can control his prices, he can control his costs, and he can make a lot of money. Carnegie Steel, he was known for not paying workers very well and making them work long shifts, and they couldn't form labor unions. So his workers didn't really love the fact that he didn't let them do these things and force them to work long hours. But later in his life, he kind of changes a little bit and he turns into a philanthropist. Philanthropy is someone that gives away a lot of money to charity, etc. So he spent his life giving away money to different charities, building libraries, helping people, and we're going to get into more of his philosophy on giving in a little bit. Here you can see a political cartoon depicting Carnegie up here as the double role. So over on this side, on the left side, he is basically being a tight-fisted employee. He's reducing wages. He's not giving his employees a great place to work. But over on the other side, you've got Carnegie, and he's giving away a library, and he's giving away money, he's giving away help to these people who need it. And he's playing philanthropy. So this cartoon is kind of saying, you know what, he played a double role. So he's not being good to his worker, but he's going to turn around and he's going to give away stuff to other people. Next, we're going to talk about a book or an article that Carnegie wrote. It was actually first titled Wealth, and it later became known as The Gospel of Wealth. But it's basically an article that was written in 1889 by Carnegie, and he described in it the responsibility of the upper class, the wealthy, to be philanthropists. And basically what he was saying in this little article is that they were giving money, the wealthy were given money for a reason. They need to be able to give it away, they need to be able to help those who need help, and they need to distribute it in a thoughtful and meaningful manner. Now, what he meant by that was that you don't just give away money to those who need it. You need to help them find a way that they're going to be able to help themselves. So you give away things like public libraries where they can go and people can read books and better themselves, or parks or museums or different cultural items that are going to help make the society better as a whole and help give people the resources they need to work their way up to a better life. That was his view in The Gospel of Wealth. Next, we have John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller made his fortune in oil. So Carnegie is steel, Rockefeller is oil. He basically started his company from nothing as well. He was selling fruits and vegetables, a small company, and used those profits to build an oil refinery, one of the first, a very early one, out in Cleveland, Ohio. And refining just means turning crude oil into useful oil. And so he started the Standard Oil Company in 1870, and by 1879 he controlled 90% of the oil refining business. John D. Rockefeller is the perfect example of a monopolist. So he basically controlled the market of oil. You can see here in this cartoon, you've got the Standard Oil Company, and it's being depicted as this evil monster that is a monopoly. It's taking control of everything. It's taking control of the banks, taking control of the shipping, taking control of the railroads, the smaller oil companies, the workers and people. So everything is within the grasp of Rockefeller and his company. You can even see here's the Capitol building in Washington, and it's wrapping around that as well. And so that's what Standard Oil became. It became a monopoly. That's a company that has complete control over a product or service. In this case, it was the oil refining business. And because he had so much power and controlled so much of the oil business, he forced the railroads and other companies to give him special rates. And they charged his competitors higher rates, therefore giving him an advantage. And he did this because he controlled the market, and without his business, they would go broke. And so they were kind of forced to do whatever he said. One reason that these monopolists like Carnegie and Rockefeller were able to consolidate their big businesses and create monopolies was because of a depression that happened in 1873. So as you probably know, a depression is an economic downturn in business. Business is not going very well in the company. People kind of stop buying. Companies have to lay off workers, downsize, etc. But if you're a big business, if you're a large producer like Carnegie and Rockefeller, now you can start using your power and using your might and start driving these other companies out of business or buying them out. So you can lower your prices and force these smaller companies to go out of business. There's not enough business to go around because of the depression. And so a lot of businesses like Carnegie and Rockefeller, their goal was to eliminate competition. If you're going to eliminate competition, you can set your prices and not have to worry about another company beating your price. And so you want to be the only oil producer so you can sell oil to everyone for whatever price you choose, and they have no choice but to buy it from you. And so that was the goal, and they were able to do it because of this depression that occurred in 1873. All right, I'm going to throw up some pros and cons of big business. So on the left side, you see some of the good things of having a big business. On the right, you see the cons, some of the bad things about having a big business. I want you to, if you need to, stop the video, take a quick look at these things, and make sure you understand that there are good things of having a big business, and there's also some cons or some negative things. All right, we're going to talk about some of the anti-competitive laws that were put in place during this time period of the Gilded Age, because of what these big business owners, these monopolists, these robber barons, captains of industry, whatever you want to call them, what they were doing. In the early part of our country's history, the government really believed in laissez-faire economics. This is a theory that the government should not interfere in the operation of the market, of the business, of free enterprise. And that means the government's going to have a hands-on approach. Big business can do whatever it wants to do. It's not the government's job to step in. That's the laissez-faire idea. Now, even under a laissez-faire system, the government still sometimes has a role of protecting things, like protecting people's property and making sure people follow contracts, that they're not cheating, etc. So there is a little bit that governments are supposed to do even under a laissez-faire system. And in the late 1800s, the things that Rockefeller, Carnegie, the other monopolists, the things they were doing were so obvious that it was hurting business, it was hurting the country's economy, that Congress put legislation in place to try to fix that problem for consumers. And we're going to talk about a few of the things that they put in place. The first act that was put in place in 1887 was the Interstate Commerce Act. Now, what was happening was railroads were not being fair. They were charging local farmers, small farmers, more to haul their crops over short distances than they charged these big companies to ship items over longer distances. This goes back to what Rockefeller was doing. Remember, he had these secret deals with railroads to give him cheaper prices. And so Congress said, you know what, that's not fair that you're charging one person more than you're charging the other, especially over different distances. And so the Interstate Commerce Act, the goal was to prohibit unfair railroad practices. And they created a group that went out and tried to make sure that no one was breaking this law. And that group was called the Interstate Commerce Commission. And their goal was to enforce the law. And the reason why we study the Interstate Commerce Act is it was the first time that Congress stepped in to regulate business in the United States. Now, the Interstate Commerce Act was not very successful. They were not able to really regulate this very well. But it is important because it's a first step in the process of the government getting more involved. So the Interstate Commerce Act, not very successful, but it's a first step. The next step is the Sherman Antitrust Act. That's 1890. Now, this law was to stop monopolies from preventing competition. So businesses were not allowed to do things that wiped out their competition. Now, this act, the Sherman Antitrust Act, this is important. This is a significant change in the attitude of Congress. Now, previously, Congress did not really want to take on big business because it did not believe they had a constitutional right to do so. But in 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act is passed, and it now says no more monopolies. We're not going to allow you to create unfair business practices. Now, it was not really enforced very well until later down the road, but it is significant because the year is 1890, and you have Congress stepping in and saying, you know what these monopolists are doing is not right. It's hurting our economy. It's hurting other businesses. And so we're going to make it illegal to prevent other companies from having competition with you. You can't do things that are going to drive them out of business and you be the only one that sells what you sell.